Hello, my name is James Rees. Welcome back to Razorwire. Today, we're going to be continuing on with the interviewing of the various different fantastic people that we know in the industry to give you a kind of overview of what it's like to be in their positions, some of the tips and tricks for their roles, how they got into the roles, and to try and give you kind of like that overall overview of where you could feasibly take your career to give you those options. So I have Claire Davies here, who's the lovely CISO from Arriva. We've known one another for a long, long time, far too many years, I think.
I certainly have been.
So you know, she's said thankfully yes to come and help us out with you know, sort of some of these interviews. So Claire, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Claire Davies, and I am the CISO of Arriva. So if you look at what Arriva is a large transport company. It's owned by Deutsche Bahn, and we operate over 40 different countries. And I am lucky enough to be in that CISO appointment, working with a great team of 7 colleagues.
Fantastic. So how did, you know, what's your history? How did you get into this game?
Well, having spoken to a number of my sort of colleagues in similar roles, I think I've got a bit of a different sort of route in really into this CISO role. And I was in the military from 18 right the way through to 40. So I did my 22-year colour service in intelligence and security and in the military. And I basically, when I got out, I recognised, hey, where is there some roles for people like me? And for me at that time, back in the early 2010s or whatever, I recognised it was information security was really the thing to get into. And that's really how I sort of transited into a role like this. So I got out of the military, and then I went into some pretty sort of entry-level roles into Civvy Street, as we call them, into the security, and then found my way into information security role, and that's where I first came across you, Jimbo.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting because you know there seems to be a few different routes that people take, and you know I've already done interviews with people who've kind of come the more commercial route, where they've gone to uni or you know worked through kind of like IT support quite commonly. For the guys who are kind of at the CISO level now, but it's really interesting to hear about your routine because there are quite a few ex-forces in this game. I think in many respects they sometimes get in a little bit later than some of our commercial guys because obviously you've got your tours of duty to do, but you come with quite significant and interesting set of skills that a lot of us commercial guys don't. And I've sat in on some of your training actually about body language and all the rest of it. I mean, when you sort of were in intelligence, obviously don't mention anything you can't, but you know, what kind of skill sets did you learn in those early days that really kind of got you into that whole, I will go into kind of information security in that long run?
Yeah, well, I suppose even in the sort of late 80s was when I first had my first security lesson, really, because doing intelligence and security, your role is actually a security threat to the armed forces. So actually, information was one of our assets, along with weapons, people, and estate, these kind of things, facilities. And information was just one of the things that we needed to protect. And actually, there's a lot of correlation, obviously, between what we do in the military. There were probably some first that started to look at things through a risk lens, that we protect everything, but what was the most critical assets to protect? You know, so bringing that along when I did get out of the military and into Civvy Street as such, there is a lot of correlation in the processes and the system that you use. But I think a lot of the things that I've used is around the softer skills rather than just the technical ones. I wasn't in a technical role in the military, but we had to have a common understanding of it, but not to the level of perhaps what you would see with the raw signals, for example. But I think softer skills, getting on with people, recognising that our job is to influence, not to be the policeman. That was really, really important. And certainly, obviously, when it comes to interviewing, it doesn't matter whether you're interviewing to get information about how a system is deployed and the controls that are there, or whether you are interviewing as a result of an incident. You know, there are different techniques. It was bringing some of that across, I think. But, you know, people process technology, or people process physical, as we were taught back in the late 80s, you know, but it's all the same thing. And we're still talking about the same sort of key disciplines, really, from 40 years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I tend to talk a lot about when I'm sort of teaching people, you know, how to get into infosec, and when I've trained up consultants, is those soft skills. I think, you know, lateral thinking, you know, Schrodinger's cat, Occam's razor, you know, making sure that you follow all the different threads, that you kind of look at the people as well as you know, the technology. A lot of that, you know, isn't really covered in the more commercial way to get in. I mean, it is, there's bits of it, but you know, I was really impressed, and I learned a lot from you when you told us about body language, just simple kind of where the eyes go when you're talking to people, that kind of thing. I think it's quite key stuff, especially, you know, in this game, because you never quite know really what you're going to be doing. You might be interviewing somebody 1 minute, you might be dealing with a security event another minute, you might be investigating a security event and suspect somebody from getting some of the corporate secrets and throwing them out to the competitors, you know, and it's all of these skills are really, really interesting and quite useful. So
I would like to add, if it's all right, Jim, because I think what's important is also recognising that our job is to bring people along for that journey. And certainly, when we look at the transport sector, you know, they're not as mature as you might see in the financial sector or retail, where, you know, they're heavily regulated in terms of many things. And so you've got to bring people alongside with you. And it's surprising when you turn up and say, I'm from information security, that a lot of people can get, you know, sort of actually really scared, or they can be, you know, they're nervous, or they can be standoffish because they think you're going to put a stop to what they're doing. So actually being able to read somebody's body language is really important, because, you know, you're able to then respond to it appropriately. And it's actually the people who have been the most hardest to work with to start with, and you've brought them round to your way of thinking, become the best advocates for security. You know, they don't need us. We are here as a driving force, but we actually need our stakeholders, and every single person, whether they are, you know, whatever level or grade that they're at within each of the businesses, you know, they all have a part to play in trying to get your message across. And those are actually our, in Arriva, our key sort of people are making a difference.
Absolutely, and again, you know, as I've said a few times to people, you know, we've got a bit of a bad rap in infosec, and I think it was of our own making from back in the early days, where, you know, you were the suit, weren't you? You were the person turning up, and it was, oh God, here comes infosec. What, you know, what have I done now? You know, rather than, oh, here comes infosec. Let's see what they've got to say today. You know, and changing that mindset from, oh God, it's the guys in the suits, to oh, you know, it's infosec. They're a nice bunch, actually. You know, it's quite important. And, you know, if you're too hard on people, and if you don't cultivate a good working relationship with the people around you, the board, your peers, the people who are reporting to you, or you know, other people around the business, then you're not going to get the buy-in that you need in order to do the job that you're there to do. You know, people might hide stuff, or they'll just go, oh God, here he comes again, you know, and it's quite key, and you are fantastic at that. I mean, some of the places where we've worked jointly over the years, which were challenging to say the least at times, but yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, did you find any kind of significant challenges in that transition from the military into Civvy Street from a security standpoint? I mean, obviously you took what you learned, and did you have to kind of really quickly skill up in other areas when you got here, or did you find that it was really easily?
Well, I say this to some of my colleagues who are also getting out of the military. I wanted to give myself time to make that transition, and that time is about not putting yourself under so much pressure. So people get out of the military and they sometimes think, well, I want to be a contractor and I want to earn this amount of money, or I want to go into a job where I'm on the board, or I want to be a CISO or whatever. And I set my 3 to 5 year plan as such that actually, I took a bit of a pay cut when I left the military. I took a job which would give me a transit period to actually sort of learn the different language. It's a massive different language. And also for myself to be able to gather that confidence to get to where I need to go and not put myself under too much pressure. I know it's different for all of us, but I think that's really important. There's a great book. It's a bit old now, but it's by Sheryl Sandberg. And it's called Lean In, and I learned a lot from that actually reading it, because it's predominantly about women in the industry, but I think that you don't have to be a woman to be actually read it and get something out of it. And one of those things is that life is a little bit like snakes and ladders. You shouldn't just constantly think that you need to get to the next rung up all the time, and you should be quite happy to sort of just say, you know what, I'm going to take this lower level job perhaps, or do this because I can see beyond the here and now. As long as it can get you to the next, to where you want to go in that 3 to 5 year journey. You've got a plan, you've got a reason for doing it. So that's something that I took away, and I would recommend for anybody. Actually, when I left the military, I went into an investigator role doing classic security investigation. It wasn't information security necessarily. It was to do with crime and prosecution, those kind of things. But I was quite happy to do that in order to really transit into civilian.
Fantastic. So, what milestones do you think people should kind of plan getting into this arena? Once they start to discover where they feasibly want to go. I mean, there's always that period of because the thing about infosec that I found is it's such a wide and varied environment these days. I mean, you go back 20 years, right at the beginning of my career, and it was very much technical. There was a little bit of governance in there, but it was predominantly technical. It was all the beginnings of AV and what have you. But now it's a very different it's a very different industry. It's changed. It's become far more important than it bloody well used to be. I can tell you that. I mean, but what milestones do you think people should really kind of plan for in the field? Is it?
Well, I think that milestone, if I can talk about my experience, like I said, is recognizing what your 3 to 5 year goal is, and to really get that strategy, first of all, which is the framework of what your route's going to be. And that's not just about the work environment, it's also about what you want as an individual. So, if you're wanting to have a family life, and if you want, this is really important to you, then perhaps you need to address your 3 to 5 year plan appropriately as well. Because one thing about security is it's not, I always say to my team, Friday comes, and a lot of companies might sort of be winding down on a Friday afternoon, whereas our team is generally at full manning on a Friday afternoon, because one of the things that I did learn is that incidents quite often get reported on Friday afternoon when everyone else whizzes away. Somebody's saying, I'll tell you what, just before I go home, I'm going to report this, and then I'm going to be off the weekend, which then leaves security in chaos. So just be very mindful of that. That I think that one of the milestones is recognising what do you want out of it. I think another milestone is also certifications and personal certifications. So in terms of your professional qualifications, I personally find them useful for me, and it was important for me because certainly getting out of the military, I did. I had some sitting guilds. That's what you were given, but nothing that was really recognised. But I was able to do some training. You get a little bit of a grant in the military anyway when you're transiting out, and I did my CISP, and that was important because I don't think I would have got the role that I did in information security, my level entry role into security, had I not been able to really put all of the workings that I had in the military into some kind of a qualification. That was me personally. So that's another key milestone. And then it's not just about bagging qualifications, it's about getting the experience under your belt as well. And people take that for granted and just say, well, I've got all these qualifications, but if you haven't got the experience to back them up, how can you then deliver that? And that's where the softer skills come in. It's really, really important. Sometimes I find there may be people that are very, very technical, but they can't actually communicate that in a manner which our stakeholders need. And our stakeholders in information security, whichever grade you're in, are quite often quite senior. And therefore, you know, you've got to be able to communicate to them in a language that they understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
things.
Fantastic. So the role of a CISO, so come on then. I mean, you know, you've got pen testers out there and they spend most of their time trying to ethically, obviously, compromise systems and then reporting on it. You've got the more compliance people, a bit like myself, who kind of, we go in, we interview, we get the information that we need, and then we write it up, and then we move on to the next one. The role of a CISO, what's it like for those of you, for those of the people watching this who are sitting there thinking, you know what, I want to be a CISO. What is it actually like from your perspective?
I can always sort of, CISO or whatever role you're in, whatever appointment, I suppose it's very easy when you're not a CISO to look up and go, I could do that job and I could do it better than that. We used to find that in the military, not as CISOs, but whatever rank, there's always somebody who wants that role and thinks they can do it. But for me, I am extremely lucky being a CISO, and that is because, one, I work for a great company, but more so, I've got a fabulous team. So I absolutely rely on that team to help me deliver that role. It is not a role which is just for one person. The strength of the CISO comes from the team, and I'm lucky enough to have a fabulous team. It isn't always easy. Obviously, there's a lot of pressures, and you do less CISO, you do less information security type tasks and more admin roles, but you find that in any kind of major job that you do, or job where an appointment, that you end up satisfying the needs of the business, the administration, the HR, the budgets, the reporting. It's never ending. There's always somebody who wants to report about something, and it's influencing people. I see the CISO role as less of the doing as much, but more of the influencing at the top to ensure that the team gets what they need, the capabilities that they need. They get the resources in terms of tooling, they get the money that they need, and they get the protection that they need as well.
Yeah.
I always find with CISOs, I would say it doesn't have to be a CISO as such, it can be security as a whole. You represent the CEO of that business. And I always say to our team that they should feel honoured that they're in a job like security, because that CISO depends on you to deliver security of the business. Unlike any other role, if you ask me, it's down to you to deliver that for the CISO. And you act with their authority as well. And perhaps that's what I think, but I certainly, in the times of the military, when you were going out and doing assurance or audits or certifications or whatever you were doing, you were always working with the authority of your commanding officer, not the rank that you had. And that's important. But with that, you have a responsibility to wield that power with thought beforehand.
I've definitely seen some infosec people go a little bit overzealous with the perceived power that they have. You know, I
Yeah,
think especially in the early days, there was a lot of people who you know, they used to get that security bat and start swinging it rather
yeah,
than sitting there going, okay, what's the problem? How can we resolve this? You know, which is
mm,
a much better set of language than some of that those early day CISOs. You know, a lot of those guys have, you know, guys and girls have retired now. It's a new breed now, and you know, with security the way it is at the moment, and we'll get onto that in a second. You know, I think it is becoming more prominent. You know, the risks of what is going to happen if you do have a big breach. I mean, the how quickly it gets into the media now. You know, the state of communications is very different when you go back 20 years. Everybody read the paper to find out what's going on.
mm,
Now, you know, all it takes is something to get onto, say, the Register or somewhere like that. And I mean, we've seen kind of like the BA problems and the Marriott problems of recent memory, and you know, even if you look back, there's some quite significant ones. I mean, where do you think security is going from here? I think one of the things that I've mentioned before in previous pieces of content, be it written or sort of video blogs, is the fact that, you know, we are seemingly going through quite a big transition in the way that we work now. With what has happened, I can't mention it, otherwise we get blackballed on YouTube. So with the whole illness that's been occurring and all the lockdowns that have occurred, we're getting a lot of reports from people like Barclays and big banking institutions and even places like Facebook and what have you, saying that they're actually going to move to a more working from home thing on a permanent basis now. Obviously, you know, as security people, we're used to big office, a few remote workers as a general rule, but everything was kind of almost centralized in many respects. There was very few endpoints you really had to worry about. What are your opinions of where you think this is going to go, you know, nowadays? I mean, are you
well, I think
looking at...
if you take, I always look at what are the drivers for information security, and I see three main ones. One, the threat. The threat is not going away. You know, those criminals, those traditional criminals that were reliant on kinetic type incidents, robbery, burglary, you know, physical type stuff, they're all starting to learn a little bit about cyber. You know, that's where the money is, you know, and that's been the case for years. They are not going away. And it's not necessarily just the cyber criminals, it's state sponsored, you know, it's the fifth battle space, as I would say. And that is something which is always on my thought process, you know, it is actually a threat. And that's the bit that sort of keeps you up at night a little bit. It's a matter of when, not if, all that kind of stuff. So you've got that, that's not going away. You've got regulations as well. That's really, really important driver for us. That is getting stronger and stronger. In the transport sector, we have seen Network and Information Systems Directive, which is a fabulous piece of regulation, which is helping to drive change throughout the sort of critical national infrastructure as such. I've got to admit, I do feel that the UK has done a fabulous job in starting to deploy that across industry. So that is brilliant. And obviously you will have seen a lot of change in PCI. That is going to drive the workload going forward. And then the third thing, which I think is where you were referring to, and that is sort of our environment and the technological changes that we are driven by. That's one of the worry beads, I suppose. It's being able to keep up with all the changes is something that we've got to always be mindful of. I think that we won't go back to the old way of working. You know, some way there's going to be a recognition. Yes, some people will still need to work from offices, and I would never sort of never be an advocate of completely working remotely. I do feel that those soft skills rely on people meeting face to face. You know, I find it difficult to have a virtual relationship with somebody to the level that we need to bond a really good, trusting team. And that's not to say that you can't trust your team, because they work remotely, but I think that there needs to be a nice balance between the two. So our environment, the businesses that we work in, will rely more upon technology to actually do their business. And this isn't just about the technology of Zoom or Microsoft or whatever application you use, but it's also just doing the back end type roles, jobs. You know, how do you making sure that pay slips are all digitalized, making sure that, you know, people are putting in claims, that they have got the tools to do the job and that they are secure, you know. So we're going to see a lot of change in that respect. We're also going to see change throughout transport, I'm sure, with demand responsive transport, whereby it's going to rely on a lot more technology and us keeping up with it in the security world. So I think that's going to be absolutely key. Our role is in no shape or form going to be belittled as a result of the change that we're going through within 2020. Everybody knows that our role is going to get more and higher and higher up the sort of focus for attention for boards.
Absolutely, and the trends have definitely been pushing things that way. I think you know, we're having a hell of a lot more conversations now with company owners, you know, central, you know, sort of high-end stakeholders, rather than kind of like the mid-level management. We still obviously spend a lot of time working with those guys because, you know, that's where a lot of information comes out of, you know. But whereas before you kind of report to the CTO or the CIO or whatever they were called, you know, or maybe the finance director, you know, the CISO role is now very much becoming kind of that advisor to the board, not always necessarily on the board, but almost like a direct comms. It's like, you know, nothing gets filtered anymore. And I think that's a really positive change for the role. Because again, going back 20 years, you know, usually anybody in that security role, they weren't always called CISOs then, you know, you'd report problems to your manager who might be in the technological sector. And they don't necessarily want to tell the board of directors that there's problems in their environment. They want to tell them that, no, everything's fine and everything's peachy. So, you know, a lot of the message got diluted, and I think it's a very positive change for what we're looking at. But okay, so the last question, this is one I give to everybody. If you could go way back to when you first came out of the military and you were sat there with your bag, probably with a pint in your hand, going, what bloody hell do I do now? Where do I go? Where am I going from here? I know I'll do security. If you could pop in at that moment and give yourself a couple of top tips to help you along the way that might have made your life a little bit easier going down, you know, what would you have said to yourself?
It's a really good question, Jim, because I look at myself and I go, would I change anything? And I actually wouldn't change a heck of a lot. I do believe in having the confidence to take a step down if necessary. And that is learning a little bit about yourself and making sure that you as an individual are ready to make changes as well. And that it fits your personal life and that you're confident to go into the role, because we put ourselves under a heck of a lot of pressure nowadays, and it's not an easy role, CISO. You know, it is a role which you know comes with a huge amount of responsibility for your team, for your business, for your CEO, for regulators. You know, it comes down to you. Your name is on the title deed as such, that you're responsible for this, and therefore, you know, you've got to be ready for it and don't just think it's an easy it'll never. So I think that I was happy to do that, as I mentioned before. That's key. I think staying true to yourself. I've always worked with three main things in mind. It's about honesty. You're honest with your team, you're honest with your business. If things aren't going right, you need to tell them. It's about loyalty to your team again, to yourself, to your boss, you know, and that loyalty comes with honesty as well. You know, you're being loyal to them, you're telling them exactly how you feel, you know. And also reliability. You've got to be reliable. You've got to be there at 4 o'clock on Friday. You've got to be there at midnight on Friday if there's an incident. You know, that's really absolutely key. I think I'd make sure that you keep qualifications up to date. I've done that. It's a bit of a pain sometimes, but don't let them slip. If you've worked really hard for them, don't allow yourself to fall into a trap which I do see some people do. Oh, I used to have those, but I've not kept them up to date. Because to me, you know, regardless, when I see a CV, I look, right, what qualifications, you know, it's great, all of this experience, but what have you maintained throughout it? It shows that you have got an inner drive to maintain. This means something to you. It's not the be all and end all, don't get me wrong, but I just wouldn't let them slip. But I think overall, just maintain that good sense of humour, because there are things which will make you chuckle because you will not imagine that these sort of things could happen. But we have got to keep a sense of humour whilst we're doing things. That's really important.
I totally agree with you on that one. I think there's been a few times we've popped down the pub after a particularly tough day and gone, oh God,
Yeah.
here we go.
Well, I think it's also, do you know what, I will end it with something else, that even if you may have some challenging debates with members of your team or members of the people that you work with, what's important is that you are able to get over that and go for a beer at the end of the night, you know, or end of the day, and you still maintain that professional relationship. Because you know what, we all have different ideas of doing things. It doesn't necessarily think that we're wrong in how we feel. It's about being open to other people's ideas. You know, that's one of the really key things I found as a CISO, that I always say to people who are the analysts within our team, you know, just because you're an analyst, it doesn't mean that your thoughts are not important, because you might bring something different, some different idea, some different capability that we as an older team don't necessarily have, and that is really, really important. And as a CISO, listen to your team.
Absolutely, and one of the things I wanted to pick up there very briefly before we come to a close was the honesty thing. I think this is something I found. You know, I mean, you've known me for many years. You know, we did a lot of PCI work sort of back in the day, and I've always had a policy of just brutal honesty, and it can be tough at times, because sometimes you really have to deliver some really rubbish news to people, and you don't want to do it. But I found, you know, as long as it's, you know, got basis behind it, there's a reason behind it, and you're not sounding like the doomsayer. And quite often I say to people, go with 3 options as well. Don't just go in and deliver bad news. Also go in and deliver, you know, ways to feasibly facilitate it. I mean, I'm a business owner myself, you know, and it's absolutely right. I don't have all, you know, I spend a lot of my time doing very different things from what I used to do when I was a full-time kind of infosec consultant. That was what my job was in its entirety. But maintaining that brutal honesty, be they a customer, be they your stakeholders, whatever, you know, if you are being honest with them, even if it's rubbish news or even if it's good news, you know, your integrity will never come into question. People always turn around and say, I don't always like what they say, but they tell me the way it is, you know. They don't sugarcoat it, they don't try and hide it. You know, they come in, they tell me the situation, they give me a couple of options to mull over, and boom, you know, we get it done, we get it sorted. And I think that's another key aspect for all those who are watching, you know, cultivate that. Obviously deliver it nicely, don't just go in, barrel in and start screaming and shouting, you know, about what's gone wrong. Go in, tell people, you know, what has happened, what are the consequences of it, have you got ways to feasibly assist in preventing some of those consequences from coming off. But go in and be honest, never try and hide it, never try and sugarcoat it, because it just doesn't work, and you just end up looking like an idiot in the long run when something gets found out, you know. But fantastic. Well, cheers, Claire, again.
Thank you.
I owe you more than I care to mention for the many years of support. And when all this lockdown has finished, I'm definitely going to take you out for a couple of bevies in a local pub.
Yeah.
If there's any pubs left after all of this.
No, there will be. There should be.
But no, thank you so much, Claire. And to those of you watching, you know, thank you so much for sitting in and listening in. If you've got any comments, questions, then please send them through. The link is down in the description for where you can email. If you've got any questions for Claire, then send them over, and I'll be more than happy to kind of field them with her and then get back to you with anything that you may be of interest. If you are in the military, for instance, and you are looking to get into this kind of career, then hopefully you've gotten some good benefits, and just reach out and let's see if we can help you out in some form or another. Thank you to everybody watching. Please feel free to subscribe and press the little bell for notifications for future content. It's been fantastic, and have a great day. Thank you again, Claire. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.